sexual health and spicy lettuce. But there was some technical issues. But I wanted to do like a special core presentation because one, it's Friday afternoon, and in most places it's beautiful out. At least I'm in Philadelphia right now, and it looks gorgeous outside. So I'm feisty and not really in the zone for super working. So if you want to type away and listen and watch at the same time, let's do it. I'm also going to be recording this, so I can't wait to share. So this is Sexual Health and Spicy Lettuce. It's for men, it's for women, it's for non-binary folks. So let's get into it. So I'm going to share my screen here, and surprise, so if you're joining us live, feel free to put your questions in the chat and I'm going to try and answer them. And then today I will be in Belmar, New Jersey with Ask a Nurse, doing questions at the Curaleaf location in Belmar, New Jersey, and this is part of their Rooted in Good program, and super excited to be a part of this. So I'm going to check my slides look good. Almost, they all look good here. So cannabis and sexual and reproductive health. So this is me. You probably already know who I am if you're already on my channels, but I am a registered nurse, and I was a former critical care nurse and decided to do botanical nursing because I saw a huge gap in care, and patients can really use this for a variety of things, not just hormonal health and sexual health, but also for chronic pain, for cognitive impairments like dementia, Parkinson's disease, migraines, you name it. Botanicals can help. So let's get into it. So the history of cannabis medicine and female health begins way back in 500. That's back in early China. It is notated that women and midwives actually use this to ease the pain of childbirth, to conceive. We see this all over Asia and Africa, both continents, really early on in the before Common Era. Cannabis is indigenous to this land in the Middle East and Africa, as well as Asia. We see cannabis growing organically. AD, it's really common in India for certain sects of Hinduism to practice tantric religious ceremonies, make it into a tea, and they called it bong. And what we think of as tantric meditation or tantric sex is not what it is as we see it as Americans. This is long spiritual practice that requires long hours of deep prayer and meditation. It is still used today. You just have to have certain special explicit permissions from priests as well as the government to use it. And then as we move into the Middle Ages, fall of the Roman Empire, into the Age of Enlightenment, and then what we refer to as the modern era, 1800s plus, we start seeing cannabis use medicinally start fading away up until the mid 1700s, 1600s, and then up until 1937, until we have that long pause until now. So what happens 1000 to 1800 in Europe? It starts to become more and more restricted. Fall of the Roman Empire, you have the rise of the church. Lots of holy wars going on. You have the Crusades, you have the Spanish Inquisition. This doesn't ease up until about the 1600s. So what happens is in Europe around the 1300s, the Pope is very uncool with medicinal cannabis use. Always cannabis use is tied to some sort of societal deviancy we see during times of prohibition. There is one person, she was a nun, her name was Hildegard, she was German. She's really the only person, particularly woman, who the Pope allowed to study cannabis as a medicine. So she actually wrote a lot about this for medicinal use. Everybody else the Pope would not allow. So this means that in Europe, women who used cannabis were accused of being witches. They were accused of having orgies in the nighttime. It was called a witches' Sabbath, and they would typically be tortured or killed. So then in the 1600s, we see cannabis make a little bit of a resurgence. It comes to the Americas, actually via imperialism and colonialism, where cannabis was used to help indentured servants and enslaved people tolerate really brutal horrible conditions and work long hours. But it should be noted that the middle and upper classes did also use hemp and cannabis. Thomas Jefferson is known for using hemp and growing hemp and using it for his migraines. Same thing with George Washington. And hemp was actually a huge export in the Americas. And it starts being used again medicinally around more formally 1800s, 1900s, up until 1937. So why hasn't the pharmaceutical industry intervened with cannabis or women's sexual health to start with? So let's talk about why this hasn't been mainstream. Well, prohibition. But why, if this potentially works for women and has been used historically, why not now? So women's sexual health is really complicated. There's a lot of gender bias, even in regular health. Regarding anything having to do with women's health, our cardiac health, our respiratory health, we are just not researched. So there's a huge lack of evidence-based practice. Modern medicine is mostly based off of studies that revolve around cisgendered straight males of Northern European descent, ages 25 to 55, and it really leaves out everyone else. And then the focus of medicine for women's health has been mostly reproduction, getting pregnant, how to get pregnant in the future, pregnancy, as well as postpartum. And then it should be noted that women get missed out 7 times more than men. And we used to diagnose with hysteria, prior to I wish I could say it was earlier we stopped doing this, but it was probably until 1970 that we diagnosed women with hysteria more often than not. We still do that. We just interchange hysteria into like get better sleep, anxiety. So we have a lot of work to do, but that's where cannabis and the endocannabinoid system can be a huge help, but not just for women, for men, as well as non-binary folks in the LGBT community. So why does cannabis do something for sexual health? It's because the endocannabinoid system, so newly discovered system in the last 30 years. And this system, I'm going to do the fastest overview I can of this, runs on CB1 and CB2 receptors. There's other receptors from other neurological functions that we already knew about, but CB1 and CB2 are the main drivers of this system. And we know it's a prehistoric system, and it ties to every cell and every organ system. The quickest way to describe the endocannabinoid system is that it affects the balance of every single cell in our body. And so CB1 is abundant in our central nervous system, but exists everywhere else. And CB2 is abundant in all of the other organ systems. Regarding reproductive health for both men and women, we have both CB1 and lots of CB2. Why does this work? Many things related to sexual health and hormonal health. Now, you've probably been told cannabis can be used as a medicine, and that might sound like complete, but the truth of it is we have here in the middle the endocannabinoid system. This is a pretty cool high-level slide I pulled out of a study from 2020. And if you look above it, there's a little squiggle brain, which HPA. That stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Now, a lot of our hormones and neurotransmitters are controlled through this really big, I would call it human software system that regulates a lot of what we do. And so cannabis works on this pathway and other things that stimulate the endocannabinoid system. And what this does, sometimes it controls our circadian rhythm, makes us, our brains react better to lightness and dark, but also can decrease stress. Cannabis and cortisol interact quite a bit. We need cortisol. Cortisol, when it's up inappropriately, leads to poor sleep, illness, as well as weight gain or weight loss in some cases. But we do need that cortisol sometimes. If we were running away from a bear, it's a really great use of cortisol. It helps us wake up in the morning. Cortisol levels are higher around 6 a.m. typically for folks. Risk for stroke increases at 6 a.m. because of that boost of cortisol, which is really interesting. And so cannabis controls the endocannabinoid system slightly before those processes happen. So in cannabis users, and very large retrospective studies of 30,000 people show that people who use cannabis report better cortisol, in preclinical studies, but also decreased insulin resistance. So we know that there's a there and decreasing stress response. Plus, we'll talk about how it affects neurotransmitters later. We see another Another pathway where sensory and visceral sensation is affected by the endocannabinoid system. So I talked about how there's some other receptors beyond CB1 and CB2. You see TRPV1 there. If you look at the gut brain microbiome important, we also just discovered that. You see CB1, CB2, GPR55. That's another receptor that is part of the nervous system that we knew of, and FA. And then another pathway that's really important in all of cannabis care and cannabis medicine is that we see this pathway where we see COX inhibitors working, and a decrease of inflammation. Cannabis works, and the endocannabinoid system is a very part of this system here, where we see a huge decrease in inflammation without the side effects of things like NSAIDs. We also see things on this pathway that also work, like PEA does stimulate the endocannabinoid system in a positive way and reduces inflammation. So when you think about what helps the endocannabinoid system, it's not always cannabis, which is really cool. Remember, cannabis appears in other plants besides cannabis. Truly, cannabinoids, I mean, appear in other plants beyond cannabis, and things like chocolate, exercise, leafy greens can boost your endocannabinoid system and interact with it. So this is just a big overview of the brain. What is very special about botanical medicine is it doesn't affect the brainstem. Things that we use to help us relax, alcohol, things we use for pain and inflammation sometimes, like opioids, do affect the brainstem, or things that help us relax, like benzodiazepine, Xanax. We also can see that cannabis can affect things like the amygdala, the hypothalamus. Amygdala is where emotional response is, but it doesn't touch that part of the brain. So this is just an example of just how abundant those CB1 and CB2 receptors are. As you can see, it's even in the placenta, which I don't think, if you talk about the endocannabinoid system with somebody, you would think, there's endocannabinoids there. There they are. So we're going to talk about the implications too of this type of medicine with pregnancy and breastfeeding. So there's also these receptors in our skin cells. So topicals, you may have heard work, and it seems like that could be snake oil too, but I assure you it's not. And as you can see, TRPV1, CB1, and CB2 right where the skin cells are on a much deeper level. So it's not just a placebo effect. Something is really happening. And I talked about how cannabis affects serotonin, dopamine, other neurotransmitters. So way back when they first started looking into SSRIs with Prozac, they had to isolate the molecule that worked on, and that was 5-HT1A. And early preclinical studies, this is still being debated by researchers, did show that these SSRIs could increase serotonin. There's a theory that mood disorders, part of the primary process is serotonin, and if we're getting enough of that or not. So SSRIs stimulate serotonin, and so does CBD. So if it's working on the same pathway, we can hypothesize that CBD and other cannabinoids may work for things like anxiety and even depression. It should be noted, choose to engage in botanical medicine doesn't mean that you throw all the pharmaceuticals out the window and you'll never need them again. For reduced pharmaceutical use, some people are able to use cannabis medicine, botanical medicine over pharmaceuticals, all about integrating this type of care with your traditional medicine. The goal is improved quality of life. So that's what we strive for. But know that there are patients that sometimes use both and have an improved outcome or quality of life. There are some people that just need cannabinoids. So there are over 162 cannabinoids, and this research is old, but this is even before the current kind of renaissance of cannabinoid medicine that we're in. We know that each cannabinoid does do its own special job, but we also know that these things work together. So I believe it was Dr. Ethan Russo who coined the term entourage effect. And so the hypothesis here is that the cannabinoids work better with other cannabinoids. The hypothesis is when we use THC alone, it binds the receptor. And if we add things like CBD, CBG, it makes THC more effective. CBD does not bond with this receptor, but it doesn't allow for this over clicking in. When THC overbinds with the receptor, like it does in synthetic cannabinoids like spice and K2, we do see people getting sick. Synthetic cannabinoids do have a higher risk of side effects. So that's Marinol, that's K2, that's spice, things you find in a gas station. Now, this is a hypothesis. We do know there's some sort of reaction. We don't know if it's on the receptor level, or this could be happening in the liver. All cannabinoids are metabolized. So let's get into the sexual health and wellness. I'm just going to check in to see if there's any questions. No. So male sexual health. So there was a lot of early research in male sexual health. It's starting to come back now. So of course, CB receptors are on the surface of sperm cells. Like I said, CB1 are everywhere, even places we don't suspect. Multiple studies have shown a negative effect on sperm count and motility, and morphology do continue to see that. There may be other co-founding factors. So if you're trying to conceive, take a break. Few animal studies have shown increased libido, but this has not been demonstrated in humans. In fact, recently, quite the opposite. So the cannabis and hormonal effects of men. So CB1 and CB2 are exist in the testes, the main driver of testosterone. Old studies said that testosterone was decreased. However, new studies, better, higher quality studies, show higher testosterone levels. So we don't know yet, but it's looking more positive than it had. It also should be said that cannabis does mimic some of the effects of things like Viagra, Cialis, that vaso. So try it and not those together. You could pass out, but know that there could be something in the future developed dysfunction or anxiety about sexual encounters for men with cannabinoids. So the dosing of cannabinoids is really, really important because you have, these are animal studies. And so know that animal studies don't always pass over to humans. About 50% of them do. But it shows that dosing matters. So when female rats were microdosed with cannabinoids, they had frequency and orgasm, and they had more sex. When they had really high doses of THC, they did not interact and they got really anxious. So thing's important because cannabis is biphasic. So we are looking for the peak effects at medium doses. If we have too much, we have more side effects, less therapeutic response. If we have too little, less therapeutic response, but also less side effects. So dosing is really important. So the magnitude of positive impact of cannabis use before sexual activity is really good for women. The study, both in organ satisfaction as well as increased sexual encounters, we see that multiplied twofold when we use cannabis. And it doesn't have to be cannabis use before an encounter. The more cannabis women use, the increased sexual activity they have and better satisfaction with sexual activity. So this could be a game changer for women everywhere. So women report increased sex drive, improvement in orgasm, decreased pain with sexual encounters, and no change in lubrication. Cannabis does dehydrate and you get dry mouth, dry throat, but in this case, you don't. You keep those secretions. So again, we can see the cannabis in the endocannabinoid system really, really, really striving for homeostasis or balance in between individual cells and that function of the cell. Sexual frequency and use, this shows both for men and women that if you use cannabis, you will have more sexual encounters. So this was not a randomized trial. There could be other co-founders, but pretty interesting. So what are the hypotheses? Why does cannabis help women in particular, but also men as well with sexual function? We don't know. With women, our sex is more complicated. Most researchers think this is because perhaps of anxiety, unpaid domestic labor. There's a lot of child rearing and chores that women have to do, even in situations where they're working. And this global studies that say this isn't my opinion. This is written down and many, many books written on this. It also, cannabis has the, it affects a frontal, So it confidence and then willingness to experiment and may lower sexual inhibitions. It also slows temporal perception of time and prolong pleasurable sensations. It also heightens sensations. Sounds are soundier, taste is better, things feel better. Of course, there's no change in secretions, which is fantastic. Routes of administration. So rectal routes of administration, there's no research proving that this works or that it is successfully absorbed. So it might only work locally. We're going to find out more, and it may not be psychoactive if you're choosing to use THC. It could also be dangerous depending on your past medical history. If you are immunocompromised, I would definitely check with the cannabis your provider if this is a safe route of administration for you. Vaginal suppositories, same issue. We don't know if it's chemically absorbed. We think there's a high chance for localized pain relief and localized effect. There's a large surface area and blood supply there of vaginal epithelium. So if there's systemic drug delivery, it should be easy and quite useful. This could help with endometriosis, pain, cramps, as well as painful sex. Evidence too, it helps with lubrication. So more on hormonal health. So I want to just make one slide at least addressing cannabis and trans and non-binary health. So as I said earlier, most of our research is on one group of people, and that is cisgendered European men from the ages of 25 to 55. So, unsurprisingly, there's very little research, but trans and non-binary people do have reported higher rates of mental illness, and there are higher rates reported of treating symptoms like depression, anxiety, PTSD, as well as dysphoria. There are increased health disparities and poor care and access across the board for trans and non-binary people. And this is also reported in the LGBTQ community, where bisexual women in particular report higher uses of cannabis and other substances, but also for bisexual men, and also same issues across all spectrums of the LGBTQ community. There is health disparities as well as anxiety with seeking traditional care. And there is higher cannabis use reported by trans folks who have had gender-affirming surgery or care who are taking hormones. And yes, it is likely that cannabinoids and helping that cannabinoid system can truly reduce symptoms. So let's talk about menstruation. So cannabis can help with pain relief for menstrual cramps. Routes of administration may vary, but all across retrospective, self-reported that this can help. Some terpenes that can help here are linalool, eucalyptol, beta-caryophyllene. Why? Reduced FAH inhibitors have anti-anxiety effects, may lead to decreased estrogen. Estrogen with menstruation equal pain relief. It is important to note, though, if you are perimenopausal or menopausal, postmenopausal, your dosing of cannabis can and likely will be different, because through perimenopause, we don't necessarily want to decrease your estrogen, as that would increase menopause symptoms. So this is where our nurses, our team, could really help you find the right timing and dosing and cannabinoid that works for you. And then also for when you're trying to conceive, you may want to pause cannabis use because there's shortened ovulation, disrupted menstrual cycles, and disrupted hormone regulation. Other things that pair well with cannabis and sexual health: estrogen replacement. There's been a lot of back and forth studies since the 1990s. So definitely talk about this or your endocrinologist. Pelvic floor PT, particularly after you've had a baby or multiple babies and as age, or if you've had any surgery where things move around. Pelvic floor PT is an underutilized resource, but fantastic and really helps women get they need in a variety of ways. It helps with sometimes where you have this opening of abdominal muscles after birth, or you just have weaker muscles after carrying a watermelon around. So that could be really helpful. Relaxation techniques. There's things like certain types of massage can help, acupuncture, and of course lubrication. Don't be shy to purchase something from your local drugstore or even a cannabinoid infused one. So a women's life cycle matters. Like I said, cannabis dosing changes throughout our life cycle, both for all genders. Children and teens and adolescents actually, for medical use, typically need higher doses of cannabinoids. Same with actually older adults over the age of 65 typically can handle larger doses of cannabinoids because both either receptors are underdeveloped or are fading away. Um, and then, of course, the women's monthly cycle also matters. So you get more THC absorption during action and less THC absorption during the end of a 28-day cycle. Menopause. So I did briefly talk about menopause a little bit, so I cannot state this enough. Things with hormonal related symptoms, menopause, PCOS, endometriosis. I have heard so many reports of women. We have helped women where cannabinoids and helping that endocannabinoid system can truly be a game changer. This is normal, especially menopause. Menopause and menstruation are absolutely normal parts of life. Living in pain and being miserable, while normal, we don't necessarily need to have those things. So we should try to improve it as much as we can, especially if we have something good safety profile like cannabinoids to do that. So my favorite joke of cannabis is back in the 90s used to tell us that cannabinoids cannot make us cool. But I'm here to say, actually, yes, they can, because it controls thermoregulation and hypothermia. So cannabis actually can lower the body temperature. And of course, other ways that cannabinoids can help with menopause. So menopause, because of the changing of hormones, can make women in particular feel very anxious. So perhaps the agonist of that serotonin 5-HTA can really help. Safety considerations. So I'm going to do these super quick. Pregnancy and breastfeeding, limited studies, and honestly, we're probably never going to get these within the next 100 years or so. Don't even have studies on regular medicine or food. There may never be double-blind trials. It's a very litigious field, so I would just not consume pregnant, or at least disclose this to your OB if you are safe to do so. So remember, if you don't feel like you're in a safe healthcare situation, I don't recommend this. And you can always reach out to us if you have questions or want to know what to do for breastfeeding. Again, we don't really know. There have been some studies that show, little harm, but we don't truly know. There's just not enough studies. We only study about 30% of modern OB at this time. The other 70% is not studied, so I don't anticipate anything changing here for at least 100 years. Other safety considerations. So if you're not in that of folks trying to conceive or pregnant or breastfeeding, safety basics: do not mix alcohol and cannabis. If you use cannabis for sexual health, or even just for fun, don't do it. It's both dehydrating. It can make you way more dizzy. Even for adult recreation, you'll use pickling. Don't drink too much. Don't probably have more than one drink. And it's not really the time to elevate your medicinal cannabis dosing or recreational dose. Before driving, always see how THC affects you. Typically 12 hours for an edible, a long half-life that we know of. And if you change products, everything's made a little different. And remember, constantly changing, so your dose is constantly changing. So if you try something new or if something huge changes, give that 12 hours. If you take too much, what do you do? If you've been to Trader Joe's, they have a lemon pepper a bottle. It's actually typically used above the frozen dish. That can help dampen your high if you mix that with hot sauce and CD. Within about 15 minutes it works. You could also lemon, peppercorn, anything spicy. Something about the terpenes flips the brain into kind of getting out of that. But of course, time is what you need. Stay hydrated. The more hydrated you stay, even before consumption, the better you will feel. So also, if you're not feeling great, remember, it will end. And drink a lot of water. And then you could always take a hot bath or shower, splash your face, look in the mirror, do anxiety techniques. You could squeeze your hand to feel your body. Finding the right cannabis products, check COAs for products. CBD market hemp market can get dicey. Some of those are synthetics. 80% of the CBD market is fraudulent or compounds have substances for human consumption. Some are synthetic and have never been tested on humans. Like they find a rare cannabinoid sometimes in the lab and it's sold in a Gaston and Wyoming. So always check with a cannabis clinician. We are here, but there are others besides us, but always check the COAs. And of course, some of these bad actors in gas stations. This is not part of the cannabis industry really at all. Sometimes it's, kind of tobacco that got forgotten about. That's where we see a lot of really negative effects come from E-Valley, because we have just no idea what is in those products being sold in gas stations. So I would advise to avoid them. And then medical considerations, check labs and liver enzymes every 6 months to a year. Typically, if you overconsume CBD, and I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of milligrams, you can see an increase in liver enzymes. And please note that do interact with over 100 medications. Typically, this is something that's manageable, but we just need to know, your practitioners need to know, so you could use everything safely and as effectively as possible. But remember, cannabis has a really great safety profile. Thank you for coming to this talk today. We are going to record it and send it out. This was an encore presentation, and we will be in Belmar, New Jersey today and tomorrow. Day 3 to 7, and then tomorrow afternoon we'll get specific times out there, but for Ask a Nurse, you could do me, and I will answer any questions that I can related to health, advocacy, endocannabinoids, botanical medicine. And we have helped women with menopause symptoms, with sexual health, both for adult use as well as medicinal use, sleep, anxiety, but also men too. So call us, and we are welcoming to all communities, and we will be a safe place to advocate for you and give you guidance if you need it. Our services start at $125 for a quick education session without dosing. Our product and dosing recommendations start at $300. However, we are starting a program soon where we will be able to subsidize care and help pay what you can, even to free care should you need a medical card in multiple states, or even just education and nursing care. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are thrilled to help you. And remember, we're always talking to your doctors and healthcare folks to decrease stigma, as cannabis is becoming more and more evolved in our healthcare system, with Schedule 3 on the horizon, as well as many states allowing cannabis use in hospitals. So thank you so much. I'm going to check the chat, and then I will send this recording out. Cool. I don't see anything in the chat, so thank you for coming. This will be recorded and sent, but if you see this later, just leave comments and I'll interact with you. Check us out on our socials, and we have big news and big changes coming as well over the next couple months. It's going to be really exciting. So our LinkedIn is Acute on Chronic. I'm Rebecca Abraham. You could always follow me. Facebook is Acute on Chronic. It is Acute on Chronic RN 420. TikTok is Acute Chronic RN. My TikTok is Rebecca Abraham 789. You could always find my founder's journey, and socials, and Twitter's Acute on Chronic. Thank you so much, and have a great